Hi, I'm Glenn Poole, CEO of the Australian Men's Health Forum. This is Men's Health Connected 2021, day 5. Today, we're looking at working with men and boys in all their diversity. And this session focuses on male carers, by which we mean men with caring responsibilities that are unpaid, men caring for example, partners and family members. And we've got a fantastic lineup all from Tasmania. So we've got a particular focus on male carers in Tasmania today. Joining us in this session, we have David Brennan, who's CEO of Carers Tasmania, Michael James, who works for a counsellor with Care to Serve and Carers Tasmania. And first off, a man who's well known to many of us in the men's health sector, we have Greg Smith of MenCare2, who in the last couple of years relocated down to Tasmania. So Greg is the founder of MenCare2, which is a grassroots community group. It hosts regular events and activities in the northwest of Tasmania, along with promoting news and resources and information relevant for all men, with a particular focus on blokes in unpaid informal caring roles. And he's not just an expert in carers in northwest Tasmania, he's an expert in male carers across Australia, and probably even a little bit globally as well. If you get his regular newsletter, you'll see he's bringing information and ideas from all over the world to his newsletter list. So it's great to have Greg here, and of course, important to note that Greg too is a carer himself, which is why he has such a passion for work with male carers. Greg, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, mate. I think you build me up a bit there. I don't think I'm an expert in anything, but I'll take it. I'll jump on here and share my screen. Just get the right one happening. So down here in northwest Tassie in Ulverston, it's a nice sunny day today, so beautiful. So we can see that all right?
Taking a few seconds, should be there. Yep, there we go, crystal.
There we go, awesome. All right, so yeah, MenCare2. I'll start probably by just acknowledging the Iris Foundation, who are auspice MenCare2. They're based in New South Wales. They're an organisation that's a charity, work in schools a lot with youth, suicide prevention, and they've got a big focus on community as well, which is why I got involved with them. And I'm lucky to be part of their organisation, and they look after all my admin finances, which is enables me to do the work that I'm doing and not have to worry about all the paperwork and that side of things. So and all accountable for the funding that I do get a hold of, which is great. So shout out to Iris Foundation for anyone in New South Wales, if you can look them up and connect with them. Just a little bit about me. I've been involved with peer support over the last 10 years. Been in an unpaid informal caring role, family carer role for over 20 years. And over the past probably 5 years or so, I've taken more of an interest because of my own experiences in mental health, suicide prevention. So I highlighted the mental health and suicide training there because I think, if anyone hasn't done it, I'd definitely recommend you to do it. And also when you're looking for someone to do it with, do a little bit of research, have a look around, because there's a whole heap of different providers. So if you find the right person that delivers the course, it makes a huge difference. So if you haven't done it yet, make sure you get in and do that training, because it's really good, and it can, it saves lives. You can make a huge difference with people in your community. So talking about carers, so they're talking about family and friends that are caring for someone with illness or disability. Carers New South Wales have a great document called A Just Reward, and it's about the comparisons of paid and unpaid caring. So there's around 450,000, this is Australia-wide, employed as carers support, care workers, support workers, aged care, disability sector. That number might have changed a little bit. The document's a few years old, but ballpark figure. So you see there's a bit of a comparison: 450,000 compared to 2.7 million family and friend carers around Australia. some comparisons there. Just pick out a couple of the wages. So if you're paid in the workforce, it's more than double what a carer payment is, and carer payments can be difficult for a carer to get a hold of as well. So and then super, leave, workers' compensation, all them sort of things that a paid care worker would have access to don't come up for people who are caring for family and friends. So that's just to sort of set the scene about the carers that we're talking about. Some comments about men that are caring. This is from a review, scoping review that was done in the UK on men caring for partners with dementia, talking about negative experiences, been a powerful influence on how help-seeking behaviours, and that that male thing of a sign of weakness to ask for help, and failure if you ask for help and you feel like you've failed with what your responsibilities are, and that's why it's so hard, so difficult for a lot of men. And I'll put my hand up and say that I struggle to ask for help when I do need it. So it's a very hard thing to overcome. In Australia, there's a replacement value. So Deloitte Economics in 2020 put the figures out there to replace carers, the family and friend carers in Australia with paid workers would be about 1.5 billion per week. Carers in the home spend about 35 hours full time caring for someone, and that's obviously going to increase over the next 10 years or so with the aging population. So this is the increase on formal care as well as informal care. There's over 1 million Aussie men in caring roles, and that equates to about 38,000 in Tassie, which is around 1 in 6. There's also hidden carers. So I sort of use an example of hidden carers as being maybe a father of a child who's on the autism spectrum. He's might be a tradie or businessman. He's out providing financially for the family, but he's not able to be at those medical appointments or take the child to school, be involved in the hands-on care, I guess you could call it. But he's providing in other ways, and he's also there as part of the family. So, but not seen as a carer. So that's where I guess the sort of link of a hidden carer. When we're looking at men in Tasmania, and the catch line there, anyone, anytime can become a carer through illness, disability, family member becoming unwell or accidents. So you can find yourself in a caring role at any time. Just some of the stats broken down over the ages through 45 and up. So that 10-year age group in 45 to 54 almost doubles into that 55 to 64 age group. So it's interesting to sort of see that jump, and particularly around that age where men are sort of heading towards that end of the working life, or coming towards the end of the working life. So there a lot more men finding themselves in that caring role. And then in the 75-year age group and over 6,500 carers, which is almost double what the female number of carers is at that age. I think we find as people age, the trend sort of switches around from being predominantly female carers through the lifetime to males being the predominant carers in later life. Talk a little bit about situational stress. So Glenn read Glenn's book, Stop Male Suicide, quite a few years ago, and it sort of helped put me on that path of recognising challenges in myself and people around me, around finances, relationships, health, and the big one I think which is there for carers is the social isolation. So recognising that all these things impact on everyone, and then if you're in a caring role and got caring responsibilities, it just is compounded, I guess, because you have less opportunities and less access to be able to reset, to find your way out of them issues. In Tasmania, the Australian Men's Health put out a report card in 2019. Tassie men ranked second last, which shows that there's a lot of work, I guess, to be done down here with Tasmanian men. Some of the stats there around physical health, and also the social support, and the suicide rates. Obviously, I think it's up to 9 Australians a day now, and 7 men, which is as sad. And so I think, again, that doing some training, some education, and then being able to speak confidently and maybe still an awkward conversation or not a good conversation to have, but being able to bring that subject up and talk to people and recognise signs is really important. And I think a big part of what's helped me over the years too, to recognise that in myself and others, if you need to have that conversation. So a couple of studies that really piqued my interest over the last few years. The 10 to Men study was a massive amount of men and boys involved, which is, I think it's probably one of the largest studies ever done, longitudinal study. A couple of the stats there about not seeking help. 1 in 5 wouldn't seek help, and the 80% wouldn't phone a helpline. I guess you think about what, if you watch the news of the night and there's a distressing story on there, it comes up, ring a helpline, ring Lifeline, or one of the others. And so to see this study with so many men involved saying that they wouldn't seek help for emotional problems and they wouldn't phone a helpline, I think is really interesting, and an opportunity there to look at other ways other than phoning for help. And I know Lifeline do the text message service now, which is really good. Health promotion. This was done in Western Sydney. Michael Whitehead, one of the other speakers at the summit, he's done a snapshot of booklets, brochures in general practice and health services in Western Sydney and Sydney. And as you can see, 36 out of 1,100 items were male specific. So that's, it's that, I guess, that sense of walking into a health setting for men, health or social setting, and not feeling like you belong, not feeling comfortable, feeling like you're out of place and you want to get out of there as quickly as you can. So I think, there's opportunities there to be able to put more male friendly, which the Men's Health Forum have the male friendly guide, and for services and general practice providers and that, to be able to implement that in their services to make males feel more comfortable, and also the opportunity to engage with men. I know we've recently had a few trips to hospital with mum, and throughout engaging with health services at hospitals, at GPs and in pharmacy, in the clinics, none of them sort of really engaged with me. None asked me questions about mum. People that are caring for someone with illness or disability, the family members have a lot of information about that person. So there's a lot of wealth of knowledge that can help the health professionals better provide for that person with the illness or disability. So I think, in my experience, and I'm talking to other guys, that doesn't always happen. So there's a missed opportunity there to be able to engage with men in asking about that person they care for, but also in engaging with the man themselves and asking them about their situation. Back to that other slide about the relationships and finances, just checking in with that guy, the GP, for example, when was the last health checkup? Most people that care for someone will be taking them to appointments to health settings. So being able to engage with that carer to look at them and bring them into the conversation, and then just throw in that question of, when was your last checkup? Can we do a blood pressure check or something simple like that to at least start a conversation? There we go. So all my experiences led me to create Men Care too, because I couldn't find couldn't find places that I felt like I belonged, couldn't find things that I identified with in the carer space. So I started Men Care 2 around four and a bit years ago now. Hasn't got a huge following, but I think the numbers there are pretty good for what is, I guess, not a topic that's not on the front foot of everyone, and particularly government. I think you look at that slide earlier on about the comparison of 450,000 employees working in the disability sector compared to 2.7 million carers, and then you look at where the funding goes. That's sort of trying to weigh that up. We should be more funding, more support around for carers. And I know David and Michael will probably talk to that in a little while. So yeah, through Men Care 2, I've linked with a couple of the national charities, Men's Health, so Mr. Perfect and the Man Walk. The three things that I sort of promote through Men Care 2 is being informed, get connected and stay active. So learning what you can about what's going on, get connected, stay in touch with people. I know when I first sort of took on that full-time caring role, I stepped away from study, from work, and isolated myself to focus on caring for the person that I care for, and that wasn't good for me. So I needed to, wanted to include that aspect of being connected with others is really important. And then staying active is obviously looking after your health and being out there and doing, getting out of the house and being around other people. And three things that I think are missing with some men's in the men's space, and particularly probably with formal services, is consistency. I think Glenn mentioned, or in one of the conversations throughout the week, it's been mentioned about services get funding for men's health projects, and it's generally a timed thing, so maybe 18 months to 3 years, and then once that's finished, it's over, and then it moves on. So I think long-term funding is needed, and to build up those relationships and to build up trust with men, because it's not something that's easy to do. If one of the slides earlier about bad experiences with a service provider and not feeling like you belong there, so building up trust to let people know that you can link in with services, and they've got male-friendly activities and events and literature that you can access. And the big one's no judgment, I guess, from a perspective of carers of all sorts, Indigenous carers, cold, people from GBTI backgrounds. I know a few males that are in same-sex relationships that have not felt recognised in a caring role. And I know that with the marriage equality and other political conversations like that have come up over the last few years, it's starting to change a bit, but there's still a bit of stigma and feeling like they've been judged. So I think there's a really important aspect of not judging. In terms of getting guys together, we try and have male-friendly places. So we've in the past, we've gathered in a barber shop and had a pizza night and just chat about mental health. We got a film. This is a film called Dad, which is all about fathers of children with autism, and they're just talking about being a dad and what being a dad of a child with autism means. So getting guys together that might not have met each other in the room to watch that film, and then conversations flowing on from that. We recently went out to Launceston Car Museum, just had a group of guys get there, and this was supported by Mr. Perfect, helped us make that day happen. So it was great to get all those guys together that are in, majority are in caring roles. A couple of them have full-time caring roles that are 100% hands-on, and they, 24/7 they're on call. So to be able to get them out for a few hours and enjoy a break around other guys and completely take their mind off things was really good. And that's basically what Men Care 2 is aimed at, is just a social connection. We have coffee chats every Monday where we get invite any blokes in the local community that want to come along to just have a coffee and a yarn. There's no set topics or anything else. It's just come along and we'll get a coffee and we'll have a chat. And we had local business productivity improvers come on board as a sponsor for that. So they've provided a bit of funding for us to be able to do that, which is great. And the Hennessy's Bakehouse has been really supportive of us with that as well. Mr. Perfect, I mentioned, so we run these in Ulverston. We've been doing so for about the last 18 months with a little break for COVID. But now we're back into it and enjoying that. And we get a pretty steady, good group of guys together, and once a month. And we've also grown. We've had a couple of more people come on board. So we've got a barbecue in Kentish, which sort of switches between Sheffield and other areas in the Kentish Shire, and also up in Burnie has just kicked off as well. So it's good to see that Mr. Perfect growing down here. And a comment from online was about not necessarily a bloke not necessarily feeling like he could go to an event, but still knowing that it's on just makes him feel better. And I think that's encouraging, that you might not get huge numbers to attend events and that sort of thing, but knowing that you're there and doing something that people see it is a good thing, that it gives them something to look at. A huge fan of Are You OK Day. I think it's just great, that simple message. of asking, are you okay? And then open up the conversation. They've got so many great resources on their website, and there's a lot of stuff there that is male friendly and male focused as well. So yeah, huge fan of Are You OK, and look forward to promoting that all year round, not just on 9th of September. And then our blokes bags that we put together, said male friendly resources. So it's all focused on things for blokes. We've got really good resource down here in Tassie called the Blokes Book, which is full of great information and resources for Tassie men to be able to locate supports and services that they do need. And we've put all this together literally in a brown paper bag, hand it to the guys, and encourage them to put it in their glove box, put it in the shed at home or something, and they've got that there. If something's going on, that they can grab that, have a flick through it, and they're bound to find something in there that's going to help. So that's me done. Just thanks again to Iris, and thanks to Glenn and everyone at the Men's Health Forum team for putting the event on and for including carers.
Very welcome, Greg. Thanks for just giving us a snapshot of all the awesome stuff you do, and a bit of a glimpse into your own world as a carer too. And it's a great place to start the conversation. So, as you've heard, mostly Greg's a carer himself, but he's also out there connecting with other male carers, so different types of peer support. But carers also have organisations which represent them all over the country. So, joining us now, we've got David Brennan, who's CEO of Carers Tas, and also its services arm, which is called Care to Serve, which is the carer gateway service provider for the whole of Tasmania. David has held senior leadership roles in Tasmania, Queensland, and the Middle East, and worked in not-profit, private, and government sectors. David's also had caring roles for his mother and his brother, so he too is a male carer, or has been a male carer, and he's lived in Tasmania since 2018 with his wife and 3 children. David, welcome to Men's Health Connected. We're looking forward to hearing from you and the role that Carers Tasmania and organisations like them play.
Thanks very much, Glenn, and g'day, guys. Firstly, let me just start by acknowledging the First Nation elders, not just here in Tasmania, but right across the country, wherever you are and wherever we're meeting. And I pay my respects to them, to their elders, to the past, present, and emerging. So thank you for having me and for having Michael from our organisation, and thanks very much, Greg. I think, Greg, you stole a bit of my thunder in terms of some of the things I might have said. So I'm just going to wing it from here, guys. But I really encourage you that if you've got a question or you've got something that you want to ask or just a point you want to make, I've kind of got the chat up there too, so I can try and see that as we're going through. But yeah, just to give you a little bit of the dry stuff. I am CEO of 2 organisations, but it's part of the one thing. So Carers Tasmania is the advocacy and the peak body for carers in Tasmania. And we're part of a national network. You may have heard of Carers Australia, based out of Canberra, but we've got a member in each state and territory. But to manage the conflict between those, we've also got another little charity that's set up underneath us called Care to Serve, and we deliver all of our services through there. And one of the major ones of those that I hope that you guys have heard about, which is the Carer Gateway. So Carer Gateway is a new kind of government initiative, which is for the first time ever. There used to be over 140 different organisations that were delivering services for the first time ever. There's one in a certain area, there's one phone number, there's one website, and that's the single place that you can go to kind of access support, information, referral, etc. That's a new thing. It's only kicked off in the middle of COVID last year, so maybe you haven't had a chance to access it or hear about it, but I'm certainly going to tell you a bit about it today if I can, and Michael may speak to that as well. One of the things that Greg touched on, but I just want to clarify, when we're talking about a carer, we're talking about someone that's caring for another with disability, who may be frail-aged, who has a chronic or a terminal illness, has mental ill health, and may have an alcohol or drug dependence. Sometimes those things are joined together, so often you'll find that if you're caring for somebody with mental illness, there'll often be some alcohol issues involved as well. And we find that fairly commonly. Here in Tasmania, we have 80,000 carers. There's been a slight drop after the NDIS. There's about 80,000 carers nationally, sitting at about 2.7. And that unpaid work contributes almost $80 billion to the economy every year. You don't see it. It's not measured. It's not part of the GDP. Government doesn't often get up and talk about it, but it's there. And the Tassie portion of that is about 2.2 billion or thereabouts. So it's a big contribution that families are making to caring for somebody that has illness of some description or disability. We did a survey last year in the middle of COVID, and we found that the amount of hours that were increased. So Greg referenced some of the last ABS data. So that's actually increased. During COVID, everybody was locked down, and we think it was carers that actually helped get us through COVID because they protected the most vulnerable in the community, but caring increased to about 60 hours a week. The type of care increased. So when we're talking about a carer, we're talking about, as you may be a carer, it could be personal care, helping or reminding somebody to be getting out of bed, showering, helping lifting. It could be practical things around home. It could be meal preparation. It could be running errands. It could be prescriptions. It could be helping getting to appointments. It can be helping with things like legal matters or finance matters. So it's a whole bunch of things that you may be doing right now that you just think that's just being a good husband or a good partner or a good grandson or a good son. But in actual fact, they are the things that mean that you wear another hat on top of those other roles, which is being a carer. Certainly my own experience of caring when I didn't realize that I was a young carer when I was a kid. My father, over a few years from about 9 till I was about 14, he slowly passed away. And I was doing lots of things around the house that a normal 9 to 14-year-old wouldn't do. So I was a carer and didn't know. And I was able to see once I joined this job that my mother was a carer on a couple of occasions. But my own experience is that I did a lot of those things for my mother when she was diagnosed with cancer in 2016. Even though I was living overseas, I still came back a lot. I still did a lot remotely. And my brother sadly passed away last year in the middle of COVID from cancer. And he was in Queensland. And even though I was here, I was doing a lot for him in terms of I managed Centrelink. I managed talking to in-home service providers to make sure that they got some support so that my sister-in-law could provide personal care for my brother. I was talking to bed manufacturers because there wasn't something locally trying to get that support in for him. And these are all the things that it means to be a carer, and maybe you're doing them and just don't know it. So I'd welcome some comments around that. Probably just a couple of other things really is just to say that broadly, there's about a quarter of carers tend to be men, and that is because who are primary carers. So primary care is the one that's on the ground doing like I just described with my brother. My sister-in-law was the primary carer, and I was a secondary carer, to use the formal language. Male carers tend to be older than women carers, more likely to be employed, or if they change employment, more likely to go from full-time to part-time, more likely to have a disability themselves, most care for a spouse. In terms of young carers, I can talk to the Tasmanian experience. We think that 1 in 15 students currently at school is a carer. And then given that the population is 50%, you know that number is quite high for young boys and young adults. It's a big number. Probably the other thing that I note is that we often find in this role, and Michael, you'll probably talk more to this, is that men are much less likely to reach out for support. And I know that that's probably been true of me. I probably felt like I needed to cope. I took on when I was a kid. I know I talked about, I remember saying to myself, I was the man of the house and I had to look after things. And that was a kind of I learned that from my father, of course, but I think that it was not helpful for me in my caring role. And I had a bit of that still left over when I was caring for my mum and my brother. even though I knew better, I was still kind of, oh no, I've got to be strong, and people will be looking to me to be strong and to know what to do. And even though I'm the youngest with my siblings, I've often been in that position. So what happens with that though is that you don't think about your own needs. You don't think about how you're feeling, how you're coping. You certainly don't admit that it's a bit tough sometimes. You don't acknowledge any emotion you've got about the situation. It all just sits there and you just keep going. And I think that that's not a good thing. I think in my personal experience, it's much better to try and talk about it, to express it, even if you can go online and write about it, that there's got to be an outlet for some of that, because it's a big journey you go through when you're in a caring role. The other thing about male carers, much less likely to access support. So, for example, we have tried to have support groups going for men. Very hard to get men to come to them, and some of Greg's approaches of not it being just for male carers, but just being for men to get together is perhaps somewhere where we can learn, and we're really looking at how we can better do that, because we're really aware that men are not reaching out for help. So we've got to kind of try and find where they are and be talking to them. The other thing, of course, you do get social isolation, but of course your own health suffers, your mental well-being dips. You don't feel as resilient as you might have before, and all these things really impact on your functioning within your family and within yourself. Now, I don't know. I've welcome anybody to pose a question or make a comment or see whether that speaks to you, because I'd love this to be a conversation where you tell us how things are going for you, or if you know somebody that's a carer and what it's been like for them. One little side note, we're doing a bit of research at the moment. So we're trying to rethink how carers are seen, not just as a carer of somebody with mental illness, but what are the other factors that make somebody a carer, and how can we more effectively deliver services. So so in Tasmania, there's 80,000 carers, but we only know about 8,000 that we've got registered with us at the moment. So there's 72,000 out there, and if right across Australia, that's the case, and they're called hidden carers. So if you know somebody in this situation, if you do nothing else from today and you're not a carer yourself, but you know somebody that is, could I just ask you to do one thing, and that is just put them in touch with us if you can. There's one phone number, 1-800-422-737. When you get to it, there is a couple of options. Just press 1. Or carergateway.gov.au. If you could do that one thing, that would really help them and would help us to be able to provide support. And I'll talk a little bit later if there's a question about the sort of support that we can provide, or guided by you, Glenn. But
yeah,
now
Michael,
I think I will just shut up.
Yeah, no, great. No, it's really interesting. I've got heaps of questions, and I'll start. If anyone wants to jump in, chuck questions in the chat box, or raise a hand. So I mean, I think the first one is about the gender piece. It's really just tuning into this conversation. Even the idea that we have a male carer, it kind of like goes back to the idea where we used to have, like, I don't know, we had a policeman and a lady policeman, or, you know, a firefighter and a female firefighter. We don't talk about male firefighters or male police officers because it's just, or male soldiers. It's just assumed that they are male, and so we have to put female in front to make it clear. And it seems similar in the world of carers, right? There are carers, and then there are male carers. So in terms of your advocacy role, and actually even just in terms of engaging with men, full stop, how difficult is that kind of that language? I mean, like, do men even identify? And this comes to a second question in a minute, but do men even identify themselves as being carers in the first instance for you to actually to be able to engage with them?
No, and that's the core problem. One of the initiatives we've got around that, we're about to launch this weekend a whole campaign for the next couple of months on tally and billboards and bus backs and stuff, which is, do you wear that carer's hat too? That's the issue. Until you realise, oh, I've got this other responsibility, I've got this other thing that I'm doing, and it has its own set of needs and responsibilities, and I've got to, you know, until you get to that point, you just keep going.
Yeah. Is that true? Is that true of men and women to some extent?
Yeah, I think it is generally true, and the consequence of that is that when somebody does ring us, they're often overwhelmed or feeling defeated and feeling like there is no way out of this because it's built and built and built until they get to that breaking point that they have no choice but to find some support. And one of our greatest challenges is we're trying to, as Greg talked about barbershops, or his experience in the pharmacy, is trying to get into those other places and say, you're seeing somebody come into the pharmacy and have a script filled out for somebody else. Have you had a conversation? You're cutting somebody's hair. You get to know that bloke. Have you had a conversation, and being aware? Because if we can help men identify as carers earlier, we can support earlier, we can connect. Some great research around that says if you connect with somebody else in the same situation and do that informal peer support, that can have a big bump in well-being for up to 6 months. As you know, you're an author in the area. So, yeah, that's a critical issue.
Yeah, it's interesting. This morning we were talking about suicide risk in older men, and that was off the back of a project I've been working on very recently, focused on the risk amongst older men, and it was in the sort of Newcastle Central Coast area. And I spent a week down there in sheds, in RSLs, in bowling clubs, spending a lot of time with either older men or people working with older men. And it was amazing how many of them were involved in some kind of, do you know what, because we were talking about just stressors and suicide, we didn't even use the word carer. I was just listening to stories. But at least half the old blokes we were talking to, they were either in caring roles or had been. They would talk, and it was more around sort of like, they were talking more around their experiences of death often, like nursing, caring for a parent, caring for a brother. It was the conversations of loss a lot of the time, but it was just amazing how it becomes the norm as you reach later life, right? Which you've already identified in your statistics. Well, I was hearing those stories. But the other piece I want to share and then come back to you is that for the last 6 weeks in the UK, my maybe even about 8 weeks now, my mum's been in hospital seriously ill, right? And I'm hundreds of thousands of miles away. But even my brother and sister in the UK, because of COVID, they're really detached. And like my brother's only seen my mum. My older brother has taken on primary carer role. He's only seen my mum twice, and yet and he's mostly 150 miles away. Yet every single day, and he's working full time, and he's running his own business, so he's working every day as well, right? And he's getting up, and the first thing he's thinking about is, what does mum need? I need to check in on the hospital. When she's going into care, what medications does she need? He's in this caring role without even actually being physically there, and I think it really speaks to the point you're making about care shows up in many different forms, and I think, particularly, I don't know if this is true, but particularly for blokes, there's a real focus on doing the practical stuff, which is a different way of, a particular way of showing care as well. There may be a more, I don't know, but there may be a more masculine way of doing care, which is about the practical stuff, sorting stuff out. I welcome any of your sort of reflections on that.
Well, probably just one quick comment on that is that although I've talked about my past caring experiences, I'm a current carer for my daughter who is having some challenges with mental illness. And you're right. And I learned this from my father. He was a very practical man. If he wanted to express emotion, he told mum to go and do something for my sister or whatever. That's how that stuff got dealt with. And I kind of feel like I'm in between the two generations where younger men are finally getting the message it's okay to talk about stuff. I'm kind of in between. So in case of my daughter, then I can do the practical things. I can try and find appointments. I can ring. I can do that stuff. And I have to say it's a bit more challenging at times to be sitting there and to do the more emotional stuff, which is about listening to her and sitting in that space with her around what is a pretty difficult thing at the moment, particularly when you're self-harming. So, it is a bit of a stretch. And I think knowing that there are places that, like the Gateway, that you can go to say, okay, well, what do I do? Because the other thing is, I never expected to be in this role with my daughter. And so here I am and I'm in it. And I think, well, bloody hell, what next? Where do I go? And thank God I work here that I was able to get that information. But if I didn't, where would I go?
Yeah.
So,
right.
there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of pressure. You feel as though you have to react right in the moment. And of course, as a parent, you feel like you have to have the answers, and you sometimes don't.
Yeah, very powerful. Thanks for sharing your personal experience in that response. Yeah, I mean, the thing that I'm noticing, just to pick up on that briefly, is that often when we're first thrown into caring roles, it's often a time of high stress, and so therefore we are coping ourselves. And then relying on all our and then we lean on our coping mechanisms. And if our coping mechanism is to get busy and do stuff, then that's what we do. We end up doing. And I say that's definitely I'm sure men and women are both capable of that, but there's definitely a great. It feels like there's a greater tendency in men to go straight for the fix it and the solution stuff. And not actually understand the value of actually just being there and just sitting there and just hearing and listening and all the rest of it, recognizing that is a form of helping. It's
Absolutely.
Just a different form of helping, right?
Absolutely. The one thing that's interesting, and although I touched on it, I think that young people find it easier to communicate and there's more permission to communicate. In talking to the schools, at least here in Tasmania, young carers are only likely to identify themselves with the school if they're caring for somebody in a palliative situation. Otherwise, it's so critical. Otherwise, they're not, because there's a stigma around caring that they don't want to be different. Because I know the topic is around boys, not just men. So I'm just picking up on this point.
Yeah, no, great.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stigma around that, as much as there is around mental illness, and the research in this area is that and I'm not putting this into boys and girls, but you're more likely to be in the most bullied group in years 4 and 6 if you're a carer, in the second most bullied group in year 8, and by year 9, boys are more likely to be behind in NAPLAN results compared to non-caring boys, and they're 6 months behind, say, female carers. So there's quite a lot of impact. So although there's an encouragement to talk, it's still a tough thing out there in the schools.
So to summarize that, there are boys taking on caring roles, and when they do, that's impacting them both in terms of risk of bullying, but also can have an impact on their educational development.
Absolutely, there's a proven impact in terms of NAPLAN measurement. Absolutely,
right? Yeah,
and the youngest carer we've had is 5.
Wow, that's so interesting. We always say that boys' education is a men's health issue, because we know for every year longer you stay in school, roughly speaking, you'll live a year longer. For every additional qualification you get, generally you will be healthier. And so if we don't, when we fail to educate boys, we set them up for poor health in later life. In very, very general terms, there's not just a short-term impact there. There's a potential long-term impact on their sort of social well-being. Yeah, got it. Yep. Interesting. Now, look, today we're trying to lean into understanding how we work with different communities of men, and we've chosen male carers in their own right as a community of men, and we've talked a little bit. Well, we've done a bit of the life stages stuff, right? So we've talked about boys, and we've talked about older men. We've talked about fathers caring as well. So we've done life stages quite well. And I think Greg hinted upon gay men who are carers. As an organisation that's trying to represent, I mean, I guess men are already the minority group, right? In a way, if we just look at the gender piece. But what about different communities of men, like male carers in cold communities, or male carers with disabilities, or male carers with gay, like Greg referenced? What have you got any insights into that? I'm guessing they're even more hidden, but any insights you have on that would be really welcome.
Sadly, I'm going to have to say that I don't have a whole lot of information, but I'm certainly aware that because in terms of body of thought and research, there's very little, not a lot in the space of carers, full stop, and certainly not much for men, and then very little in terms of different groups. But of course, we are well aware. So we know we struggle to engage and support First Nation carers. and for similar reasons, called carers because the sense of community that sits around somebody in a caring role overrides all other considerations of self to the point where they relegate their own needs much further down and fail to even acknowledge them. But we are doing work in that place, and we're trying to do that at a very local level to connect up with organisations that have got those relationships and can see what's happening and then provide that support. But sadly, overall, Glenn, no, there's not a lot of research there.
No, understood. I mean, we've certainly just in the last couple of weeks, we've working with older men. I met quite a few gay older men, and it was so. One man in particular, because I'll take it back a step. In our national men's health strategy, which is part of our framework for making sense of the world, we've got like 9 priority populations, and there's many more, but we've got these 9 priority populations. It includes veterans, and it doesn't include carers actually, which is why I think male carers are hidden in the men's health strategy. Greg, it's important that we have this conversation, but it includes veterans and it includes males who identify as coming from LGBTIQ plus communities, and it also then references life stages. One of the older men I met was a gay older man who was also a veteran, so he'd had the trauma of being conscripted in the late 60s, full stop, the trauma of that, plus the trauma of being a gay man put into the army at a time when the stigma was huge. And then went through, so he had that trauma in his past, and then went through caring the HIV/AIDS crisis, which a lot of gay men of a certain age went through. Either that they lost partners, or they lost friends, or they were caring for partners and friends, and then struggling with the DVA to have his partner recognised. Because you could only have a partner recognised for a war pension if they were the opposite sex. So it's just but in one man's story, there was so much kind of richness and history about how those different layers of identities can build up to add barriers and stress upon people. I just wanted to put that story out there as an example of how those different identities can overlap within men's roles. So he was a carer for a period of time. It wasn't just a carer.
I think that Michael probably hears a lot of the stories more through counselling than I do at my level, but the themes are fairly clear that if you LGBTIQ carers feel more invisible and more shut out and more ignored, male carers do. If you're from the CALD community, that you feel less able to engage with the systems that are to help you get the help and support that you need. All carers talk about invisibility in the health system. So they'll go into hospital with somebody that they care for. They've got a mountain of information that can really make a difference in assessment and treatment, ignored. I recently spoke to the Joint National Standing Committee on the NDIS for independent assessments. There's a carer impact statement that is not mandated. So carers are not, so they're able to see what's happening with the person that they're caring for with disability.
Yes.
Is not taken into account. Maybe they're told that they can make a statement, maybe not. And that experience of invisibility and being pushed to the fringes is a very, very common theme that carers talk to us about.
That's really interesting. So then what we then move on to is when we're looking at women's health and men's health, when we as women and men are experiencing poor health, the kind of illnesses that require us to have a carer, the fact that our carer is not heard and not seen actually can negatively impact the quality of care and support that we get.
Absolutely, particularly if you're caring for somebody with episodic conditions. So for mental illness, carers regularly tell us that they see that person 24/7. They know what goes on, but that person is able to manage their behaviours often for that 30 minutes that they're with the GP. Same too if you're caring for somebody with, to a lesser degree, with autism. So under this current thing where they're trying to independently assess participants for the scheme, if they happen to arrive and that child, often as it is that we hear from carers, is having a great day, or that's a great hour, that's a different outcome than the other 23 and a half hours of the day where it was really difficult and that carer is just not being heard.
Yeah, understood. Thanks, David. You've given us loads of insight. Thanks for sharing so openly your own experiences as well as your wonderful professional perspective of the. I don't know what do we call caring community? I guess
Yep.
It's not professional sector, the caring community. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So David kind of sort of began to introduce Mike there, and I'll finish that job. Michael James. Mike has worked in community services and counselling roles for over 20 years in a variety of settings with diploma, bachelor and master's level qualifications. He's worked with Carers Tasmania for over 5 years now as a counsellor in the Launceston office, and as a carer himself, Michael shares a caring role of his mother with his 2 siblings. So he's got some similar experience as other carers who use the carers gateway. And just remind me, Mike, am I saying Launceston right? Because I think I always get it wrong.
I guess being British, you're used to the other pronunciation.
Launceston. I've said Launceston a few times in Launceston and been nearly chased out of town. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope you still had a good experience.
I love Lonnie. I love Lonnie. It's great. Yeah.
Well, I'll just share my screen. One moment.